We are in the end of sprint 33 today. We'll start 34 uh first thing tomorrow. And these are the things worked on sprint 33. A lot of different areas. I won't go through them line by line, but also just want you to know we're continuing discovery into applications, assessments, services, career plan, exits, and outcomes. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. And then Taylor's UAT. Thank you.
Thanks, Sal. So just a reminder, last week we did, or the week before, we did UAT release 4 cycle 2 on additional contacts. We checked the UAT notebook and it looks like only one person has provided feedback on this UAT. So if you have not done so already, please go in there and do that UAT for additional contacts. If you have already done your UAT and you did not have any feedback, if you could just go into that UAT notebook and make a comment on there with your name saying like no additional feedback, that would be really great. That way we know that you at least looked at it. We'll send a reminder email out after the meeting today with all of the documents and things like that for you to review. So if you have any staff members that participated in that UAT, please feel free to forward that over to them so they can get that looked at. And we would ask that if you could try to do that by end of day on Tuesday, June 17th, because it is overdue now. So we'll get that all sent out to you guys later today. So for today's working session, we've got 2 topics coming up. I'm going to take the first part of the session. I'm going to walk you through some credential discovery. And then once I'm done, Olivia is going to continue on with her application discovery. So I'm going to go ahead and get some things pulled up for credentials. So we've been doing credential discovery with the state for the last several weeks on when you're adding credentials. And when I say adding credentials, these are the outcomes. So not any credentials that you would be adding like that they had completed prior to starting the program, but any credentials that they earn while they're in the program that would count towards that outcome measure. So we're going to go through a process flow today with credentials. And as we go through these flows, we're going to talk about some different mock-ups and things like that. Get your thoughts and feedback on it and see if you think what we're doing is going to work. So to give you some ideas about the customer process flow, we'll go over this and we'll pause partway through this and we're going to go through the ETPL side just to make sure we're all on the same page. But when we are talking credentials, these are all the prior steps that would be completed for a customer before we're ready to add credentials into the system. So for a customer, they would already have their pre-screening completed. They would have their application completed. They'd have their assessments completed. Career plan's been created. Training need has been determined. Goals and objectives have been set and services have been opened. So for the purpose of this flow, assume all of this has been completed for the customer. So now we're doing our regular career planning for the customer. And we're going to move into step 1. So training program has been identified and the training service has been opened. This service is going to remain open until the training is completed. So they're going to do the regular training through the training program. In that service, you will have to fill out the fields needed for your training program. We're not going to go over these fields in detail. This is just a quick view of like what you would have to do for a training program service. This is an example of like occupational skills training. So you would tie them back to your goals and objectives, determine if it's ITA or contract funded, what providing entity is doing the training, what program they're doing at that providing entity. It'll tie in your SIPs and your ONET codes, and then just your normal stuff with like your completion status, your plan dates, your actual dates, and any comments that you would have to put in. So at this point, service is open, you filled out all the stuff, and the customer is doing their training program. That is just step 2, that regular maintenance of assisting them through that training program. Step 3 is where we're going to get into our credentials. So your customer has now completed the training program. This could be a successful completion or an unsuccessful completion. Either way, they have completed their training. So what's going to happen with credentials at this point is once you are in that training service, so I'm going to use the occupational skills training as an example, and you go in and you select your completion status as either that successful or unsuccessful, and you go in to click save, to save that service to say it's now done, a modal is going to pop up for credentials, and it's going to ask you, it's going to display your providing entity in your training program. The example customer I used here is they did the electrical distribution lineman program at Lincoln Land Community College. And the system's going to ask you, was a credential earned as part of this training service? Because the goal out of this is to make sure that if they did earn any credentials in that training program, we're easily able to capture it when we're closing out the service. So it's going to be a quick and easy yes or no. So the easy one is no. Mark, should that read recognize credential? That'll come down in the next the next piece. So at this point, we're just wanting to know if any credential was earned. And so if you say no, maybe they weren't successful in the program, they didn't complete the certificate, they didn't get anything out of it, you're going to click no, and you're going to click save, and you're going to move on. So now at this point, your customer is in the measure for a credential because they had the occupational skills training on their career plan, but they didn't earn a credential. So then they would either not be a positive in the measure, or they would have to earn a credential the other way. But this customer, we're going to say, yes, they did earn a credential. So we're going to click yes. When you click yes on this modal, it's going to bring up more information in the modal. And I've got a couple of different ways that this can look. But then it's going to give you a list of all of the credentials that can be earned at Lincoln Land's lineman program. So there's going to be two different categories. There's going to be acceptable credentials earned under WIOA. And we have two different ways that text can read. So I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on which one you think sounds better. So the first option is the one that's in this mock-up here. That's going to say acceptable credentials earned under WIOA. Option 2, this could say WIOA recognized credentials earned. So if you guys could let me know which one you think makes more sense, or if you think something else makes more sense, you can either just unmute and let me know or type it in the chat. But which one do you think a career planner is going to understand better? And there will be an info bubble right next to it that does explain what this means with whichever option we do. And I've actually got that text a little further down. So for this info bubble, it's going to say the following are credentials recognized under WIOA for performance reporting purposes. It's like the folks in the chat are putting in option 2. If you just want to give me an option 1 or option 2 in the chat, that would be great. So this is going to be a select all that applies. And in this exact example for linemen, they can earn 2 certificates in the lineman program or an associate's degree. The first certificate here is actually their CDL. So if you do not have your CDL in your lineman program, you do it as part of the program. And then they can either earn a lineman certificate or a lineman associate's degree. And then I honestly don't know if lineman requires a licensure, but we're going to say for this purpose it does. And there's also the occupational licensure. So you're going to go in and go, okay, what did the customer earn? Maybe they already had their CDL when they went to lineman school, and they didn't want to go through and do the full 2-year associate's degree. That was too much time. So they can click the box for occupational certificate because that's what they earned. So these are all the recognized ones here. And then underneath here, we also have what's called other learning achievements earned. So these are going to be those like smaller like certificates that are kind of more generalized that don't count as a WIOA recognized credential, but you could still earn them in the program. So these would be like your OSHAs, your food safety, first aid, CPR, things like that. If when this training program was set up in the ETPL, if they indicated that they had any of these, they'll show here as well. So if this customer earned their OSHA certificate, you could click this like other certificate and OSHA, but you're going to know that that does not count as a WIOA recognized credential because once again, there will be an info bubble text here that kind of explains that. That says certain credentials do not meet WIOA's definition of a recognized post-secondary credential and will not be counted for reporting purposes. And it says general certificates awarded that are not formally recognized or accredited, but they could earn an MSG. So it depends on what type of that certificate it is. It may be able to earn a customer an MSG, but it's not a guarantee. work readiness certificates, and then also those standalone certifications that are general, so like hygiene, safety, things like that. So we still want to be able to capture those if they earn them, because they might be good for the career planner to know later down the line that the customer has their OSHA or has their CPR, but it's not going to count for WIOA. If there is no learning achievement for this program, like when Lincoln Land set up their alignment program in the ETPL, Paul, will the ETPL require the institution to identify the credentials training will result in and MSG, or will this be up to the career planner to determine? So that's a great question. So when we go into the ETPL, so we're going to scroll up here, maybe if I can find it. So we're figuring out, how do we know what credentials are being earned? So that's going to be set up completely in the ETPL, Paul. So the career planner is not going to have to make any determination on that. It's already going to be set up on the back end, and we'll be able to know, is this a WIOA recognized credential? Is this a non-WIOA recognized like certificate, or could it be an MSG? So that's something that the MSG is the only one that might be a little different. And Olivia, I don't know if you could speak on that a little bit, on like, how would we know if it's an MSG? Because I don't think they set that up in the ETPL, correct? They're not setting up MSGs.
No, we would still add MSGs our regular way. We will look to identify if there's any business logic we can implement. If there's things that are being put in that we would know also equal an MSG and we can tag them in a way, we will auto add those. But we have future development work to talk through the business logic of MSG to see how else we can streamline and automate MSGs versus just the manually entering way, which we have set up now.
Yeah, so more to come on MSGs, but the credential piece, that will be it'll be set up on the ETPL on the training program side. Toriana, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so I have actually a couple of questions. So one is in regards to when we go in and a career planner closes the training because someone's finished. And so the big example is like your CNA or your like your healthcare programs or your CDL. So they may finish the training, but at that time yes, they're successful, but we do not have credential in hand. And that actually happens a lot of time. So there then be at that time, are they answering yes, it's successful, yes, they earned a credential, or are we answering no at that time until we have the credential?
If at that point, like especially for those ones that maybe you have to take, like for nursing, you have to take your NCLEX, and you don't know yet if they've passed the NCLEX. If they don't have anything else earned, you would answer no at that point. However, when we get into this flow, there's going to be a way for you to go back in later and add those credentials that way. So I'll show that to you further along.
Right. So I guess I'm referencing closing the training, because we would close the training, or are you saying training should stay open until they earn it?
Training would be training closes when they're finished with the program. So if they finish their associate degree in nursing, they've graduated, they're done, they've got their associate degree, but they don't sit for the NCLEX for 2 months. You wouldn't leave the training program open for those 2 months unless the licensure is part of the program, which more often than times it's not.
It's not. Right. And that's what we do. We just, a lot of times when they finish training, most of the time we don't have the credential in hand. That doesn't come from the school until a month or 2 months later.
Yeah, they don't mail it in.
Right. Correct.
But even in this example, you might know the customer completed their associate's degree. You just don't have the source documentation.
Correct.
Yet. So you could still, in like this example, click yes, they earned their associate's degree. And what will happen from there is when you click it, it's going to give you an option to put in the date the certificate or the credential was earned and upload source documentation. But this is optional at this point, because we know, you may know the date they attained it. But yeah, community colleges or most colleges, they're not mailing out diplomas or certificates until, a month or two after you graduate. So what will happen is if you have it now, great, you can go ahead and upload it. But if you don't, then when they provide you with that source documentation, you'll be able to go back into the credentials screen, which that's also another piece I'll show you in a little bit, and you'll be able to upload it then. And we will have like a dashboard reminder for you saying like you have X amount of credentials with no source documentation. So you'll be able to follow up on those easily and not have to manually try to remember, oh, who did I upload for? Who did I not upload for, to kind of just give you that flag.
Okay. And second question, if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is, for example, we have like the CNA program, or I guess CDL would be the biggest one.
Mhm.
When they finish their CDL training, that particular training provider, that credential, I guess, certificate of completion will go under other learning achievements. It'll tie it to that training provider, because it's my understanding that those currently are not considered credentials. They're considered other recognized degrees or something like that currently in IWDS, unless I have that incorrect.
So to make sure I'm understanding, you're saying like the certificate they would actually earn through the school would not count as a credential, and only the licensure would?
Correct.
I am not well versed enough to speak on that. I'm not sure. Mark Burgess, would you know that by chance?
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so for CDL as an example,
Uh-huh.
if they complete their CDL at, let's say, Lincoln Land, and they earn their
Right.
certificate, would that certificate itself be a recognized credential, or would only
Yes.
the licensure be?
No, they would both be.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that? This is Lisa. That happens a lot with IT programs, a lot, where they get the certificate of completion from the training provider, but then they don't sit for those exams.
Just a second. Certificates of completion, it might be poor wording, because certificates of completion is not a recognized credential.
Correct, and
It
that's
just
what
says you
she's
completed.
right. Well, that's what this
That's
is.
my question. Yeah.
That's what Toriana is
Oh,
asking.
well, when it was
Because
repeated,
that-
they said it. Yeah. When
Yeah,
it was
'cause that's-
repeated, she said the credential from the CDL course. That's different.
Well,
They would get they would get an actual certificate for successful completion of the course, not a certificate of completion, but an actual recognized credential.
I think it's just a matter of how we're saying it, because like this happens like all the time with a CDL. When they finish the program at the CDL provider, they're not able to get a job as a truck driver without getting that license. That's a no-brainer.
But
when
that's
it comes-
separate.
Right. So the license itself is what is counted, and not that they completed that program at the school. But for IT, it's different. With employers, they will hire you without that like the actual industry that, sitting for the exam, if you have the training behind you. And so there's kind of lands my question with respect to this. Would that be considered something that we would put in as an occupational certificate?
You have to
piggybacking off of Toriana's question. I'm sorry, Toriana, but it was too good to ask.
Yeah, because we were always told that the CDL and CNA, they cannot, when they complete their training, they cannot go and get a job. So that certificate of completion is not considered a credential. It's an other recognized, which does not allow you to even pull over on the exit screen currently.
Correct.
Those are two separate things, though. Just because that doesn't get you the job doesn't mean you didn't get an actual credential. You would have to look at the credential from the training itself. Because I can get a job as a CDL. I can go out and get my license without ever going to training. I could have worked on a farm and operated trucks and tractors for many, many years and walked into the CDL licensure and got my license without ever going through training. You have to look at what you receive following completion of that training. If all it is to say you completed, great for you, you came for 6 weeks, now go get your license, that's a certificate of completion, means nothing. If, however, you got an actual recognized credential, then you would get credit for that, and you would get second credit for the licensure once you get the license. So it's all about
considered
what
a
the actual
recognized
document
credential?
is. Excuse me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it depends on what the document is you get from the training itself, and has absolutely nothing to do with whether you can go get a job or not.
Olivia, what were you going to say there?
Taylor, I think Taylor is getting there. We're
With
gonna
the
have we're gonna ask that whenever a ETPL program is added into the system, that whenever they're identifying credentials, they identify all credentials that are earned. So we want to know those stackable credentials. And then whenever those programs are getting approved by the local and state ETPL coordinators, they will be flagging which of those listed credentials are considered recognized and not.
Right. So like,
So whenever your career planners are going in to add those credentials from the list that we pull in, they're not having to make that decision. They can
Correct.
say, hey, they earned their certificate of completion. And we're going to know on the back end that that is not recognized. But when they go and say, hey, now they have their licensure, the system will know that it is recognized and will count that towards positive performance as long as they're on the measure, which they should have been had the training program pulling from the ETPL in most cases, but we're only pulling obviously for folks on the measure. And this is just the path for whenever they're completing an ETPL training program through the system. We're still having the conversations about the other branches because we know there's other ways. Those get a little more complicated. So we're still trying to determine that. But the big thing here is we're gonna be asking for more credentials in the system than you guys currently put in. But we're not going to be asking that the career planners understand the ins and outs of what is counts for performance and what doesn't. We're going to be setting that up in the system for the system to make those determinations where we can.
Correct. So when you're seeing this screen here, the ones that are showing under this first option, so the WIOA recognized credentials, those were set up by those were approved by the state and local ETPL coordinators. So they've already been reviewed. They've already said these count for positive performance for WIOA. And then anything that shows under here on the other, these are the ones that you can still earn through this training program, but they are not WIOA recognized. So the career planner is not going to have to make any decisions of, do I know if this counts for WIOA or do I not know? It's already set up for you. And that's where we go back into this. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? If you can go back to that section real quick, where it says, I know you're going to give the info button on what is determined as acceptable and what is determined as an other learning achievement. But is it possible to also do info bubbles, or is this just way too much overkill on what each one of those underneath is? Because occupational certificate, and then it says it twice with letters behind it. I think the career advisors might not.
So this is just an example. Whatever's going to display here will be what was put in the ETPL.
Okay.
So
yeah,
they
just
haven't,
like,
okay. I don't know how that's going to be entered yet. So this is just a rough example. But the reason why there's 2 occupational certificates is because in this program, you can earn 2 certificates. But however they say, this might say occupational certificate, and then in parentheses, it's going to say like CDL. And then it could say occupational certificate, electrical distribution lineman, certificate of achievement, electrical distribution lineman, associate degree. So however they put in the name in the ETPL, that's how it'll display here. And then whatever they say, when they're setting up their training program in the ETPL, if I say this counts as an occupational certificate, they're going to click that. This is my associate's degree. I'm going to click that. And then there's going to be a question, I believe, where they're going to say, does this training program, do you need a license to get a job after completing this training program? It's going to be worded much nicer than what I just said there. But it's, the training program is going to let us know, yes, you need a licensure to get a job. So that's how this licensure popped up. So I know, yes, to that example earlier with CNA or nursing, I can complete my program, but if I never get my license, I can't work. So we will know up front, you need a license. So you'll be able to go back in and put in your licensure credential here.
Right. And I just want to make sure that if there's a licensure required, that doesn't mean that when you complete the course, you're not going to get a recognized certificate or
Correct.
credential or degree. So please don't try to think that if I can't get the ultimate job because I didn't get my license, then I got no credential at all. The training itself is a separate thing from the license, unless the licensure in some cases is included within the training. And we think that's somewhat rare that the provider would take that upon themselves to actually go through and give the licensure also as part of the training program. So you can
No,
still
they
get a
include the
credential from
money.
completing the training that's acceptable as a recognized credential, not just a certificate of completion that you went through the program. Even if you don't get the licensure. And if people have been misinterpreting that, I hope we haven't lost too many credentials
Well,
along the
typically
way.
it's the IT. It's the IT programs that really is the one that is the biggest
Because those
issue
you can
when
earn
it
so
comes to
many little things along the way.
Well, because what happens is there may be added, credentials that individuals have to sit for in order to say that they are, black belt, Six Sigma, or whatever, they have like all of these, idle certifications, whatever the case may be, but they have to sit for that. The school itself is training the individuals on those particular pieces for them to then sit for that exam to be credentialed, but they're not the certifying body, and they are receiving funding to pay for that credential, but the customers are getting jobs just for the training, and they don't have to actually get that, mouse certification. I'm just making things up, and they're receiving that funding, and they're not, the credentials never follow. So yeah, Mark, there may be a lot that's missing on that. I think that needs to be defined a little bit, especially with IT programs.
Well, there are websites out there that show whether it's recognized credential or not.
Not every single one though. We have
Well, if it's not on the list, then we can't accept it because we have nothing else to base it on.
Right. So I think that, it's more just the IT programs that is probably one of the biggest pains when it comes to that. Certainly you can find out project management credential through PMI Institute, but there's many different places, and it's not that cut and dry to find those credentials online. We have become Sherlock Holmes in these pieces. And if the training providers aren't pushing them to pay, to send them to these training programs because they completed and the person gets a job, then there's also that issue as well.
Okay, wouldn't that be known by the?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, wouldn't that be known before someone is put into that training program? If you're going to miss a credential because you don't know that the end result leads to a credential, then I'm not sure why we're putting someone in that program.
Well, they do lead to a credential, but they can get a job without it. So the customers don't sit for that credential because they're already getting that job for going into that training program.
That's part of career planning. That sounds like a poor career plan. If people are dropping out before they get to their ultimate goal.
Oh, no, they're not dropping out. They're finishing the program.
They finish the program,
then why didn't they get the
just don't go and
credential?
sit for the test. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because they're not.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an example. You go to an IT provider. They have multiple different training. Their training plan has 4 different things that they're going to be working on to get that data analyst job or whatever the case may be. They go to the classes. They finish that program, but they have to sit with an outside body for that credential, whether it's, like getting their project management certificate or whatever through PMI. They're doing IDLE, they're doing all these other things. They have to sit for those, but they already have on their resume that they completed this training program, and the IT employers that are hiring them are like, well, you have the skills. You've gone through the training. We're hiring you. So now that provider that did that training, they didn't have them come back to sit for that exam and pay for that credential. If that's the only way I can explain it, they are finishing everything, but they're not getting the other pieces of it. It's IT is the biggest problem. It's there. That's the biggest problem, because you don't need that to get a job. You need the training. to get the
So
job.
for this example, I can't speak to how it works now, but I can tell you for IWDS 2.0, when that IT training program is getting entered into the ETPL, or once it's entered, they're going to put in all of their, like all of the outcomes they can earn. And if one of the things is like they get a certificate for completing the program, not sitting for a test or anything, but they get a certificate. And once the local and state ETPL coordinators review this training provider, they're going to determine is that certificate a credential, a WIOA recognized credential, yes or no. So if they say yes in the future, then getting
It's moot. Yeah, it'll be
it's
beautiful.
done.
Yeah, it's going to be
And then
beautiful
if they
having
go,
that
if they
happen.
do go back and they sit for the test and they come back and say, hey, I got my license, now you have 2 credentials.
I love this because this will be super helpful for career advisors, and it will also put the onus back on that training provider because they're receiving that additional funds to do those credentialing tests. And a lot of the customers aren't going through with taking that. So I think this is a wonderful enhancement with IWDS 2.0.
Cassie has her hand up. She's had it up for a while. Then Paul will
And then
get to you.
Cassie, then
Yes,
Paul.
thank you. Good morning,
Sorry, we didn't
everyone.
forget about you.
That's fine. I just want to get straight to the point. So I noticed that I was listening to a lot of the questions and concerns, and it seemed like we veered off into case management. But my question is, right now we have something in play to where it is a list of certified credentials that we are able to put into the system. Will that list be updated for us to follow what you guys need us to do? That's my question. So the agencies. So right now it's a list that says, okay, these are the recognized credentials that you can put into the system as a recognized credential. It's a list right now. Will that list be updated for this new IWDS 2.0?
Taylor, you want me to answer this or you want to take it?
You go right ahead.
Okay, that list will go away because you're going to be adding all credentials regardless of if they are recognized or not recognized into the system.
Okay.
We are going to be building the back end of the system, processes in the back end to determine if those will be deemed recognized or not. So like all the ones coming from the ETPL, the probably state, we're still talking on the who, the local or the state, but one of the ETPL coordinators will be looking at the credentials associated with the program and saying this one's recognized, this one's not, because we're going to have them add all credentials into their ETPL program as outcomes, not just to recognize. So you guys can have a more full picture of what the customers are actually earning as part of their experience and engagement with you all. So that list will go away and the system will start taking on the role of making those determinations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Paul, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think you clarified it, but it just seems like our conversation that we've been having right now is really going to be almost a moot point because it seems like when the training provider is going to request that their training be approved, they would have to fill in the process what credentials are going to be achieved through that program, and they're going to have to list them. That goes into our system, and then you guys vet it out at DCEO and determine if they are or are not. And then that's going to be listed in the other screen so that when you're about to put in a credential, it's going to say, well, I have in front of me a certificate of completion, but I don't have a license. So then when I go in to put in the credential, it's going to say under the other, right, that's where we would put the certificate of completion. And then when we get the license and we try and put it in, it's going to say that's a recognized industry, recognized credential, and therefore you put it up at the top, right?
Correct. If when the training program is set up in the ETPL, the ETPL coordinator determines that certificate is not WIOA recognized.
Right.
So if it's not WIOA recognized, it would show under other. So you could still capture it, And then once they come back a month later and say, hey, I've got my license, here's my proof, you can go back in and you can click that licensure, put in your source documentation, and now you have your WIOA recognized credential as well.
Right. So like right now in the current system, the career planners are pretty much making all the decisions and trying to figure out if it is a credential or not.
Yes.
Whereas in the 2.0, it's going to take some of that, lot of that guesswork out.
Correct. Yeah, so if that certificate is considered WIOA recognized when the program's being approved, then it'll show in that first option. So that's going to be a determination between the state and local ETPL coordinators per policy. So if the certificate and the licensure both count as WIOA recognized credentials, they'll both be in that top option and that customer gets to earn 2 credentials. But if it's not WIOA recognized, then it's going to be under that other section. So you can still capture it and then get your WIOA recognized credential when you have the licensure. So it'll all already be set up for the career planner, and it's just going to depend on when the ETPL coordinator reviews that program, is it WIOA recognized or not? And like I said, and if it is, then it'll show in this first area. And if it's not, it'll show down here. So the career planner is already going to know, okay, these are all the things that the customer can earn that are WIOA recognized. These are all the things the customer can still earn, but they're not WIOA recognized. So they're not going to count as a positive in the performance measure. So yeah, we're taking a lot of that guesswork out for the career planner. And then Bernard, you have your hand raised as well.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, 2 quick questions. Just to give a little context, I was a technical recruiter for 5 years. And so my first question is, it's about 50-50 on the credentials. I mean, at the end of a program. So for example, let's say you are in a program for cloud architecture. That's basically like managing servers that people use on SharePoint. And you go through, and the checkpoints are like AWS, maybe it's cloud solutions, maybe it's software engineering or something like that, en route to that. My thing is that those are actual credentials along the way. Those aren't like certifications. Those are credentials to do AWS for Amazon, for example. So like if a person goes through a program and they get to the end, and for example, you don't have to sit for a license to be a cloud architect, but you have these credentials along the way. Is that considered not a positive? I mean, is that like how do we square that, knowing that you don't have to sit for it at the end, but you have these credentials along the way?
That would be determined, once again, I can't tell you yes or no, like those would be WIOA recognized because I'm not an ETPL coordinator. But when that program is getting set up in the ETPL, that training provider is going to enter all those credentials, all the ones you earn along the way. And then when it's getting reviewed and approved, the state is going to be the one that says, this is WIOA recognized, this is not WIOA recognized. Because we know not all training programs you go through, you're going to have to sit for a licensure. So they would answer in this example, there's that question that will say, like, does this training program require a licensure to get a job? They're going to say no, because you can get a job just by completing the training program. So then down here, that occupational licensure is not even going to show because you don't need a license. And then whichever one of those credentials the ETPL coordinator says, yes, these are WIOA recognized, they'll show here. And then if there's any that they say, yeah, no, these are not WIOA recognized, these are stackable credentials, and that you have to get the last one for the actual WIOA recognized, and those would show under here. So that'll be on the state and local coordinator to decide what ones are going to fall where.
Bernard, you said that's an occupational certification, right?
Yeah, so like the reverse happens if you go to school. Like I could go to school to get my degree in information systems, but if I don't have those certifications, I'm not going to get a job.
So you have to go back and do all of those along the way.
Even if I have a degree.
Yeah,
I taught at Lake Forest College, and that happened all the time.
Yeah, looking at the DOL thing in Mark's comments, those would be industry recognized. So just because you didn't sit for the license wouldn't mean you wouldn't have one or more certifications that are giving you positives and performance.
Right.
And
And
so
then
it sounds like if there's like 3 of those that you have to get, then it sounds like they would be in this box here.
yeah. And then
So
my
if you
last
earn
question,
1, great, but if you earn all 3, even better, then you have 3 separate credentials for that customer.
right. And then my last question is what kind, and this, tell me if this is, I'm hitting foul balls on this. What kind of, how do we, if something is WIOA certified, right? Like, is this based on an institutional accreditation, or is this based on industry and what's generally accepted in the industry? Like, for example, you got some of these companies, I'm talking like IBM, I'm talking uh, CompTIA, I'm talking Cisco Systems, right? Like, for example, if when we talk about WIOA recognized, is that just based on an institutional accreditation, or is that based on what we're seeing in the actual workforce? Since it is technically innovation, like if it's going to be Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, then where's the innovation part in terms of determining whether or not whether or not it's matching up or WIOA certified? If is it on the accreditation side, or is it based on what's being sort of progressed in the industry?
Mark, you have your hand raised. I'm hoping you have an answer for that.
Yeah, there are organizations that we rely on, such as IBHE, Secretary of State, industry recognized organizations like ASE, things like that, that would be the ones that make a decision on whether that certificate, credential, whatever is the outcome of a training program would be
Mm-hmm.
considered recognized post-secondary credential, certification, degree, or diploma. So we rely on them. We don't make that decision. And so it's, it would be up to matching up to that. And if
So it is institutional accreditation, not industry standards.
well, no,
Like
they're
not employer,
industry standards
not based on like because we know that a lot of times what's happening right now, especially for example, let's take artificial intelligence. That stuff doesn't exist right now at the institutional accreditation level, but employers are hiring people with these credentials.
right. I mean, if there's no organization out there that will recognize it and indicate so, then that's a certificate that's not useful from a perspective of getting a positive outcome under WIOA. And when we say we owe
Okay.
recognize, that's just a generic term. We got to remember, WIOA doesn't recognize anything. We are trying to just match up and use some general terms to say we're looking for something that is acceptable to get a positive outcome
Right.
for a WIOA program.
And so what
So,
I
we don't really have another term to use other than to say
right.
WIOA recognize. They don't recognize anything. So we just have to find that entity or organization who can do that accreditation and indicate that, yes, the outcome of that training, that piece of paper, that certificate, credential, diploma, whatever, is an accepted one in the industry. And I'm sure they've got a big long list of things they have
Right.
to verify to
So
produce.
so does that responsibility then fall on the career coach to do that research?
No. That's what Taylor and Olivia are saying. It'll happen when this list she has showing here on the screen, when a provider enters those, they will have had to say that I'm entering it here an acceptable credential because I know that ASC accepts this in the auto industry, or IBHE
Right.
accepts this in whatever, or Secretary of State accepts this for truck drivers or whatever. So
Okay.
that all has to,
So
and then
so
we because this becomes a list in here, we, I guess, at the state
right.
level will work with them to ensure that the list is accurate.
Right.
And
So
someone's not just blatantly putting false lists of
right.
things under acceptable credentials.
Yeah, so I guess that comes back to my point that to a certain extent it is subjective if we're able to find an organization or an institution that would validate a specific credential as something that could be used going forward. Then the discrepancy comes whether or not that it be recognized by WIOA, even though it's done by some outside accrediting institution.
Right. I mean, I don't know how often these lists are updated. These organizations are looking at new, like you say, there's things, especially with AI or whatever the topic is, that are always being developed. So, how often are they looking at these constantly, every 6 months, every year? So I would say if someone were to be looking at a program and go, well, I don't see that it provides an acceptable credential, but in my mind as a career coach, I think it does, then we would have to work with that provider to say, so tell me again, and let's look at this and see if
Okay.
maybe there's a new
Yeah.
understanding that this is now recognized when in the past it wasn't. So we can make that program. And it shouldn't be on the ETPL. Should never get
Okay.
approved if you can't find at least one credential for that. So
Right.
it really wouldn't be the career coach that would even notice that because it wouldn't be on the
Okay.
list to select from.
Gotcha.
But as
Okay.
you're working
That's
with
helpful.
providers, you go, hey, the provider comes to you says, hey, we now have a program that we think should be on the ETPL because we now have a recognized credential where in the past we didn't.
Yeah, so and the reason why I'm asking is mainly because as we go into the new programmatic year, like if we're trying to expand our portfolio, at least on the IT side of things, I'm just trying to find out what's the best way to go about it as a center director in terms of coaching coaches on how to, under the new system, how to like have those conversations.
Well, from a coaching and a career planner perspective, I mean, you got to start with what's on the list. If they have some insight of a program that's not on the list that they think should be, then it can be brought to someone's attention. But they're really only able to select from the ones that are on the list. So if that provider hasn't gone through the process of getting their credential recognized, it's not going to be on the list to begin with. So it wouldn't be available to
Okay,
select or discuss with the participant.
gotcha. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys taking the time to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, and Lisa, you have your hand raised again as well.
Yeah, I just have a question. You mentioned earlier about how if the question, when they're adding these to make sure that the acceptable credentials are added per program based on what is considered something that they need or whatever. You mentioned, if the occupational license isn't something that's needed for the job, that won't be listed. What if the customer then does get that license? Is there a way for us to add it in there with like an other, or is there a possibility to have any of the possibilities added in there? Or is it only
Are you
based on
saying
what
that-
is written in the ETPL?
Are you saying that like a license, you can get a license for this program, but it's not required to get a license to get a job?
Correct. Yeah, because you mentioned something about that when you were talking, saying yeah.
I would have to default to, and I don't know if Al's on. I don't know how that question is exactly worded in the ETPL. I don't know if it's worded as like it's required, a licensure is required, or if it's
Well,
just something more generalized. It says like a
Unlike-
license.
I think that on the back end is what she's talking about, Taylor, in the sense of, okay, so the provider says you don't have to have a license to get a job. It might enhance your ability to get a job or
Mhm.
increase your pay to start. But let's say as Lisa's saying, they go out and get that license after, it's not on the list to select because it wasn't
Yeah,
something that was required. I got to believe we should have another at the back end when a training is completed and we're getting ready to exit a participant. And they say, "Oh, by the way, I know it wasn't required, but I thought it helped me. I went out and got my license on this thing. Oh, great. Let's go into their file and be able to track that." I agree, and if that means it's
yeah, I totally agree.
or
I'm just
something,
trying to figure out how
we
it
certainly
would
should
work.
be able to make that happen, Lisa.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great because like I'm just thinking of HVAC, for instance.
Yep.
They finish the program. They might not necessarily get that EPA, sit for that to get the EPA or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm a little rusty on my credentials, but maybe they do, but they can still get that job without it. So it wouldn't show it there.
Well,
in the
another
system.
Yeah, another example, it might relate to some other occupations that do this, like lawyers and stuff. My son's an actuary, and they have all these tests they can take to show different disciplines.
Mhm.
I would think the provider would not list all of those because you don't have to have them to get a job. But at the end, if I took 2 or 3 of those while I was in school, which is what most students do, I would want to be able to get recognition for that. So I want to be able to put that at the end to say, hey, oh, by the way, I got 2 of these tests out of the way, and I got, if they're recognized credential, I don't know. I got to believe what he's going through, the costs and all that when he goes through every one of these testings, that he's getting a recognized credential at the end. then we should be able to capture that at the end, even though it wasn't at the beginning saying I had to have it to get the job.
So maybe there's a way to maybe put it in as an optional.
Right.
under there?
We'll have to look at that. And like
Mhm.
Taylor said, work with programmers and I'll and figure out whether it's just another and you can add it, or maybe a third category of, oh, by the way, were there other credentials received? And we can have a list of certain things that are there that we know might come of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I made a note of it.
Because that's the one thing we want to do. You know, if not only from a positive of WIOA, and it's kind of the opposite of what we were talking about earlier, is I mean, we want to make sure we're capturing everything we can so we're getting credit. We got to keep showing our value of the system.
Right.
And the more we can show a participant is getting out of these training programs, the better off we're going to be. Now, we can only report one positive because they only get one credential positive in the measure itself. If you get 5 recognized credentials, only one's going to go in the measure to go to DOL to say, hey, we got a positive. But we can at least at the end of the day start showing reports of how many credentials were earned overall. On average, 1.5 per participant, whatever we want to do. That's what 2.0 is going to allow us to do, a lot more of that tracking and reporting of outside activities and stuff.
I just love the fact that it takes the not guesswork, but takes it away from the career planner as to defining what that credential is, that it's going to be up here at this level. I love that. I think that that's just going to make things a lot easier. And then having those discussions with the customers on the front end, like, here, this is what is going to happen. These would be ones that that is saying you need that for finding employment in this particular field, because we have it listed straight out from you guys. I think that's just great.
Olivia did say, as a note, the question will be written to capture when a license is an option and not just required for employment. So it sounds like regardless, if there is a license associated with that program, it'll be an option for you to put in, whether or not it's required for a job.
And
with
that's
that-
just based on our conversations right now. We're still kind of figuring out these
the
other
logistics of
branches
how
and
it'll all
everything. So
work.
it could change a little bit, but that's kind of the track we're going down.
So to end up this piece here, so you've added your credentials. If you had your source documentation, cool, you can go ahead and put it in. If not, you'll be able to put it in later. And that goes into our next piece. So adding those additional credentials. So I completed my associate degree in nursing. You added my credential for my associate's degree because I had that, but I haven't sit for my NCLEX yet. And now I come back 2 months later and I say, hey, I passed my NCLEX. Here's my source documentation. And then you're going to still be able to go in and add those. At this point, your training program is going to be closed because you finished your associate's degree. You're not in that training anymore. So we're not going to force you to go back into the service and, filter your way all the way through that service and add it through that service. You're also going to have a way to add credentials from the outcomes screen. And I don't have a full view of this. Let's see which one. So I'm going to show you kind of a rough idea of what this would look like. So in IWDS 2.0 currently, and bear with me for a moment because most of this you have not seen in UAT or probably any of it, but if this will load. When you're working in a specific customer and you go into their application, you have this drop down that says what area do you want to work in, and you can work in intake, you can work in the career plan, you can work in outcomes. So this is where you'll go into outcomes here. And when you're in outcomes, it's going to show you, it'll probably be something different like exits and outcomes, because this is where you'll manage exits as well, which that's a whole separate conversation. So ignore that. But you'll come to this exit tab or this outcome tab here, and you're going to have all the outcomes that a customer can earn. This is a very rough mock-up. And you're going to see all of the credentials a customer has earned. You're going to see all their MSGs. You're going to see employment. You're going to see education. These are blank because I have not started discovery on those. And now I come back 2 months later and I say, hey, I got my NCLEX. Here's my source documentation. And you go, okay, great. let's go ahead and get that entered. You can come in here. It's still an outcome because it still was tied to your training program. And, you know, it was just like that next step after you completed your training program. You're going to click this add credential button. Excuse me. And let me go back to the Miro. So then you're going to get this pop-up that's going to ask you a very similar question. Are you adding a credential that is tied to the customer's training program? It is still tied to the customer's training program because it's a licensure that you completed after the training program. You're going to say yes. We're not going to go down the no track today because we're still doing discovery with that with the state. So we're just going to go through the yes track. So you're going to say yes, and then that exact same thing is going to pop up that you saw before. So now it's going to give you a reminder of the providing entity the customer went through, the program that they went through, and it's going to show you that exact same list. So now I say, okay, I have my licensure. You can click the licensure button here, and then it's going to pull down the date and source documentation again. So if they earn a credential after they complete the training program that is tied to the training program, you can still easily enter that. It'll just be from the outcomes page here. And then, like I said, there is a no track, like so if we're adding credentials that aren't tied to a training program, but we're not talking about that today because we need to finish up doing some discovery with the state before we figure out how that's all going to look. But that's how you would add credentials that are tied to your training program. You're either going to add them directly from the training service as you're closing out the training service, or if they complete their credential after they've completed their training program, then you still have the option to come in here to this outcomes page and you'll be able to add credentials from this area as well. And like I said, this will just be kind of a nice place for you to go and see all the credentials they've earned and then all those other outcomes, the MSGs, employment, education, things like that.
So will it always be in that outcome tab, even those that are exited and they get the credential after exit?
As long as it's within the 12 months.
Of course.
Yep.
But it's not in follow-up. It is, or in post-exit, it is.
No,
just
it'll still be
outcomes.
the comprehensive list right here.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any thoughts or any questions about that? If not, I know we only have a half an hour left, but Olivia, the time is yours.
It looks like there's stuff in the chat. I was gonna read that real quick.
You get that pulled back up.
Okay, yeah, they're just, yeah, okay. So any final comments or questions on the credential stuff before we switch gears? Okay, Al, was there anything you wanted to ask them before I jump into application?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
But we do have some, as Taylor was describing, we do have some training outcome changes that we're going to be able to capture some of this stuff. So we'll get some of this, but yeah, I have nothing today.
Alrighty, so I just wanted to open things up from our last conversations about application and pre-screening. We are going to get a little bit of pre-screening work into next sprint that we start tomorrow. We're going to start laying the foundation of that into the system and continuing to build and expand off of that so we can get that into UAT sooner rather than later. We know there's a lot of questions that are conditional and then just like checking the flows of potential eligibility recommendations versus not. It might be a little easier to fully understand and engage with in that UAT environment. So we are working on that. We are kind of trying to define MVP still. So we talked a little bit about like the CRM stuff and got information from you guys on how you would like to do that. If we do move that route, that might be something we roll out a little after MVP, and we might start with just getting our customer records created and then sending out that welcome page before we, do all the CRM. We're still flushing all that out, taking the feedback we got from you guys back to the state. And I did get some, there were some things I said I was going to talk to with them, and I wanted to bring that back to you all. So I got a couple of questions via email and got those answered. And so for additional context, whenever we're doing the application, we are not requiring, the system is not going to stop somebody from going forward if they don't have an additional contact in the application. But you all have the ability to capture those and get those as you locally determine how many you need. But the system is not going to put a stop on somebody not being able to move forward without one. We are not going to be using mailing address to map high poverty area. We can't do that. That only really applies whenever you are picking your living situation. If you pick that you are homeless or if you are a youth runaway, which only people between the ages of 14 and 18 would be able to pick that, is when we ask for mailing address instead of the street address. And when we do that, a homeless is auto low income as well as barrier. And we had conversations that if somebody is also a youth runaway, they would be treated similar to homeless, where we are not needing that high poverty area to determine low income. So we won't map with mailing address, but it's not really going to be needed because the two that we pick would auto have that low income associated with the barrier of their living situation. And then I got a question about social security number and using the social security card as proof of documentation for things like authorized to work in the US and stuff. When we go to collect social security number, we're not requiring any kind of documentation just to prove your social security number. So we don't need it just because you enter a social security number. But if you're using their social security card to verify some other eligibility requirement, like authorized to work in the US, if that social security card has a restriction on it, you need the supporting documentation that goes along with that restriction. But you can use other types of supporting documentation that's outlined in the source document listing. So we're not going to require that they can only use that with the supporting documentation. But if you're using one with restrictions, you do need the supporting documentation. So
Can I be clear? Can you clarify that a little bit better? Are you saying we don't need a social security card to show correction and the same thing as you just said? Because if we're not going to ask them to see the social security, how would we know is it authorized to work? Because I'm going to tell you, if I'm coming into the system, I would say, oh, my number is this and just keep it that way.
When you are verifying authorized to work, you have to have some sort of documentation. And if you choose to use social security card for that, and it has a restriction on it, you need the supporting documentation. You can't just have the social security card with the restriction. Like if there's one for DHS authorization only, then you have to have that DHS documentation as well as the social security card that has the restriction on it. But if you're just uploading, if they like verify authorized to work with their birth certificate and then later you clock their social security card, the system is not going to require that they also upload a copy of their social security card to prove their social security number.
So can we ask them from a local area standpoint instead of a state if we want them to show us the card, and we don't have to upload it because we do ask for social security card for the purpose of making sure, hey, is this person legit? Because sometimes we may get people who got bogus social security. You can look at it, but we don't question it. We know it's an illegal social security card, but there was never no restriction as far as what do we do if we encounter somebody with an illegal social security. Because there's a way people go to and get a dummy social security number. And it works.
Yeah, we're gonna allow you to upload, like at the end of the application, if there's additional documentation you want to collect locally, you can do that at like the certification. We'll have a space where you can upload or like review additional documentation for that customer. The big thing is we don't want to stop the customer, be like, oh, you can't move forward in the application, you need to go get all this. We want to be able to let them get through the application with the documentation they have. And I get in the example they're giving you like a fake social security number. And so you want a card to like verify that. But if somebody like just didn't bring their social security card in, we want them to still be able to complete the entire application without having to go back and get that. And we have to make sure, I don't know if Mark's still on, we attestation, I don't know how that would work, Mark, because can they set local policy to collect more documentation before they can move forward?
No, they can't be more stringent than what the law says. So if self-attestation is allowable, I don't know. We should verify that with someone.
Yeah.
But
we
in my
will.
mind, if self-attestation is allowed by WIOA, we have to allow it. Now, what we've talked about in many of these conversations is part of that request for documentation is supporting not only that immediate need for it, but like for the Social Security card, you would say, okay, I understand you don't have it with you today, but be mindful, you're not going to get a job without a Social Security card. You're not going to be able to drive a big truck without your CDL license or with these kind of things on your record or whatever. So, when you're doing it and the locals we've talked to, especially OES 7 representatives have said for the most part, people just give it to them. I mean, it's not a fact of not being able to get the Social Security card or some other documentation in most cases. What it can't be is say, well, I know you said you have it. Bring it back tomorrow. We'll talk more tomorrow. That's the whole purpose, is to keep the conversation going. And you would push to try to get that document still, and you need it for the job. Somebody in your case, Robert, where they've created a Social Security card or something, that's not a we owe us problem. I don't know how that would be handled. That's a legal police problem that you need to report if
You
you
got
catch
that
Well,
right.
I think
Yeah.
too, based on the fact that we will not be requiring SSN, so I don't think you can require them to prove their SSN if the system's not even going to require that they have to have an SSN to be served.
Well, I'm
Correct.
I'm
So I
saying
think
like
you
for
could
his instance,
ask,
if I just make up a 9-digit Social Security code or find somebody's on the street and I turn it in, it's a valid number. Um, but I mean, and if you know that it's not their Social Security, that's beyond we owe it to address that.
Mhm.
That's something they have to address with the legal
Exactly.
law
Exactly.
enforcement.
Go ahead, Paul, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so currently in the current Iowa system, you cannot, there's not an option to use self-attestation for, just stating social security. I mean, like you can't use self-attestation except for DACA, somebody that's DACA, but you can't say I'm using self-attestation document for the social security number. So it looks like if we choose social security number as the document for verifying authorized to work, you would have to have that documentation.
Yes.
But we're talking 2.0, Paul. It's going to change.
Yeah, but if you did, like if somebody was saying like using their social security card as source documentation for an eligibility item, then yes, you have to have the social security
Right.
card. But they don't have to give you their social security card just to prove the social security number they gave you as that data point. Because at their private information, when you say like, what's your social security number, them choosing to give it to us is optional, and then giving it to us is enough. We're not going to say also upload documentation as part of that. But yeah, you're spot on. If I say I want to use my social security card to verify something and it is an acceptable documentation type, then they have to give it to you or choose some other documentation type.
Yep.
I think the big question, I don't know that we want to go into it today, but I'm sure you're thinking about is if we don't get SSN, how are we going to get wages from IDS? But that's a different conversation.
Thank you, Mark. I was thinking other reason as well, but I'm just following along with everybody.
Yep. And so the system, even if we don't put in a social security card or social security number, it will let us certify the application and serve that person.
Yes. According to law, that is what we have to do. There will be training around it though. You know, we want to try to get the SS in whenever we can get the SS in. We're not saying stop getting SSNs, you don't need it because it will impact your performance. Okay. And anything else on that before I'm gonna switch gears to some other questions, provide some context. Okay, so we're gonna pull in EBS data as part of the application. So if folks have went through rapid response and we have that tied to the EBS event when rapid response services were provided, we will be able to flag that and bring awareness to the career planners. So if those folks don't need to go through orientation if they don't want to. We're also going to be looking at adding info bubble text to the homeless and runaways like we've talked, and adding some additional text to the Social Security overview text option to make it a little more customer centered and show how them helping to or providing that can help us continue to make these resources available. Somebody brought that up. So we are actually moving forward on a lot of the information you guys gave around just some more helpful text. We're moving forward on, I think, all of it. Go ahead, Lisa.
I have a probably incredibly stupid question, and I apologize because I'm not 100% when it comes to EBS, but I was in EBS the other day and I was seeing only the people that were filling out the survey. Is everybody listed in there?
No, we are not connecting down to those questionnaire surveys.
So how are you able to tell that they participated in that rapid response in order to bypass that orientation?
We are going to be able to say that they were provided rapid response services for the employer they were laid off from.
Whether or not they participated or not, it was just that it was made available.
Yes, we hope to eventually connect down to the questionnaire and connect. So the EBS questionnaire, people do not have to be logged in to do that. So I don't have it tied to their workNet account to be able to bring that over and tie it into their IWDS account. And so that's the piece that we're kind of looking at bridging to actually make that more streamlined, and then also take the data from their questionnaire and just like pre-populate more information in IWDS.
Because that's the part that, I was talking with my staff with respect to outreach. Once the individual is completed with rapid response, you have to hit, do multiple touch points to get individuals to come through, move forward in WIOA, because sometimes they're just not ready at that moment that they participated, but there's no real way to capture those individuals unless they complete the survey.
Yeah, so that is something we do have conversations on, of like, how can we connect that survey back into IWDS? We have a couple of thoughts on how we can do it, but that'll probably be something we really dig into. I think they're getting ready to do some more EBS work in the near future. And so after MVP, we can look at better connecting that to just import it directly into IWDS and make that more visible to the career planners.
And then the actual DETS number will be also automatically applied because it's in EBS
Yep.
Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we'll do the EBS search right now and pull in the EBS event ID, the employer, but like the date they were laid off, notified. A lot of that data we'll be able to pull into the dislocation job, the NAICS code, the ONET code, all that fun stuff. We'll continue to keep pulling all that from EBS when we can get it, and then even when we can't get it from EBS, so like it's not an EBS event, we are still gonna connect to we're verifying, we have legal looking into this for us, but connect to the DNB, the Dun and Bradstreet employer list, and pull at least like the employer name and some basic, like the NAICS code and basic information on an employer to try to streamline the entry of that. So customers or career planners aren't having to retype stuff, we could just auto-populate.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wrote down the new question. We'll talk a little bit to the state about what was brought up about the SSN and using a fake SSN and local policy for that. But I want to kind of open things up now. Those were all the questions that I took back to the state and wanted to make sure to bring that all back to you guys. Do you guys have any other questions on this or any, after we went away last week, anything you kind of thought about or wanted to make sure you got clarification on? Okay. Well, I probably will not have applications on the agenda next week. We have more in-person meetings. We're meeting very regularly with the state, both virtually and in person, to keep moving through this. But I will have it on the agenda again as we make more decisions and have more concrete flows. We do want to get those in front of you guys. Right now, we've walked through Maria is our customer. She is a single mom with 2 kids who was laid off, and we are currently walking through Maria doing the application all on her own. We have several personas set up that we're going to continue to hit against the application, both customer and career planner focused, to make sure that this is flowing smoothly for a customer's experience and a career planner's experience as well. So as we continue to get further into that, I will bring this back to the group. Looks like I have a couple of chats. Okay. All right.
And just an FYI to folks, we are canceling next week's session because it sounds like the majority of people will be off for Juneteenth. Just as an FYI, starting on June 26th, you probably, those of you who are our core team that are on every week, have currently 2 meeting invites on your calendar, one from me and one from Kelly Trimble. The one from me will be canceled today, but the one from Kelly will remain on there. So when you get that cancellation, no, we're not canceling the sessions altogether. We're just canceling mine and getting all of our meetings moved over to Kelly. So we will not meet next week, but we'll reconvene on the 26th.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. We'll go ahead and give you about 9 minutes back to your morning. I will get an email out with the UAT links and the date of June 7th, having that done and making sure everybody gets that signed. Even if you don't have comments, you'll be getting an email from me shortly once I get the recording up. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.